The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. It's that time of year. Salmon are completing their life cycle, returning to where they were born, to spawn and then die. Over the weekend, the Nanaimo River Hatchery is hosting an event. To mark the occasion, I spoke with manager Brian Banks. How is the salmon population doing around here in Nanaimo?
It's staying pretty consistent. We're here to try and keep the Nanaimo River healthy, and we're seeing good returns. It's staying fairly strong the last few years, so it's looking good out there.
And what exactly is your role in all of that? What happens at the salmon hatchery?
Yeah, in the hatchery, we spawn the returning adult salmon and incubate the eggs, kind of giving them a jump start to life. Kind of protecting from the natural floods and things like that, predation. So we kind of give them a jump start to life and then release them back into the river. Try and mimic wild size as much as we can to just get good survivals and better returns.
How many salmon are we talking about?
At the hatchery, we incubate 2 to 3 million eggs every year. 4 different species: Chinook, chum, coho, and pinks.
And could you tell me a little bit more about what's going to be happening this Sunday?
Yeah, so this Sunday is our annual fundraiser. We're a nonprofit society, so we rely heavily on the public and for extra funds to do things around here at the hatchery. So this weekend we're having our fundraiser. We'll have our salmon barbecue at the Nanaimo fishing game. Then lots of activities to see, egg takes, fish dissection. You can come see the chum spawn in the creek, release coho fry into the river, and then many different organizations will be set up with information booths. So it's a great family event just to kind of see what we do down here and kind of learn a bit more about salmon.
Brian Banks is manager of the Nanaimo River Hatchery. At that event this weekend, you'll also find Nanaimo Science. I got in touch with Nicole Williams for a refresher on the salmon life cycle.
My name is Nicole Williams, and I work as an outreach educator for Nanaimo Science. The full name is Nanaimo Science and Sustainability Society. And we're a nonprofit, and we teach scientific concepts to children through a variety of platforms.
And coming up pretty soon, you'll be teaching about salmon. Could you tell me
exactly right.
What kinds of salmon do we have here in Nanaimo?
We have our Pacific salmon along the coast of BC, and so that would include Nanaimo. We have chum salmon, Chinook, coho, pinks, and sockeye. Within Nanaimo itself, we would have strong runs of cohos and pinks.
Could you refresh my memory on the salmon life cycle?
I for sure can. So the salmon life cycle is quite complicated. There's many steps to it. So I think what we'll do is we'll just start as eggs. And so these eggs are placed into nesting areas called redds in fresh water, so rivers and streams. And within these redds, these nesting areas, they're in gravel, and they hatch in about 3-ish months' time from when they were deposited in the fall. When they hatch, they become alevin, which are the next stage in the life cycle. And alevin are quite small, and they have a yolk sac attached to them. And so the alevin feed off of that yolk sac for several weeks at a time, still hiding within the gravel of the red. After that several weeks is done, they will become fry. And fry is when the salmon actually starts to look like a proper fish, albeit very small. That's when they start swimming, and that's when they start eating organic matter and finding places to hide. They'll stay fry for about 5 to 10 weeks or so, and then they move up to a par, which is a bigger version of this fish. They develop kind of vertical stripes along the sides of their body, and they'll stay as pars for several months. And then from there, they'll start working their way down towards estuaries and becoming smolts. So they will start to become acclimatized to water. They'll start getting silver, and they are growing very rapidly in this brackish water in these estuaries to get ready to go out to sea. And they will stay as a smolt for 1 to 3 years, depending on the species. And then when it's time, these salmon will head out to the ocean as a adult. And in the ocean, they're very transient. They move around a lot, and they spend about, depending on the species again, 1 to 8 years out in the ocean. Then they return back to their natal stream to spawn, and that will happen in the fall. So using essentially their nose, like using smell, they will return back to the stream that they were born in, and they will spawn and then die. And so with this life cycle, the eggs are deposited again, and it continues. Salmon are semelparous, which means they spawn only once, and they are anadromous, which means that they spend time in freshwater and saltwater.
How does salmon know or decide when it's time to go back and then spawn and then die?
That isn't well understood. There's lots of factors that come to play, and it really depends on their biology and when they are mature, which is different for the species of salmon. Pinks will return in 2 years' time. Chinook sometimes take up to 8 years for them to return back to their natal stream.
And Nanaimo Science has an event all about salmon going on this weekend. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we are hosting a informational booth at the Nanaimo River Hatchery this weekend. And it will just be an interactive booth with some hands-on activities for kids and adults alike to just become aware of salmon, the role they play in the ecosystems, and information about their life cycle and their biology. We will have some fun activities such as like a salmon life cycle mix and match game, salmon species identification games, display boards with information about salmon biology, the significance of hatcheries, and the connection between salmon and local indigenous communities. And we'll have a few other things too, interactive activities that will just help people get engaged with the importance of salmon in our local area.
Nicole Williams is with Nanaimo Science, who you'll be able to find Sunday from 10 to 3 at an event at the Nanaimo River Hatchery. Next on the program, we'll hear from Sam James of the Pacific Salmon Foundation for more on issues impacting salmon.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. Support and grow our nonprofit newsroom project today at chly.ca/donate with a monthly or one-time donation. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
In honor of their spawning season, we're devoting this episode to salmon. From chemicals in tires to issues related to aquaculture, there are no shortage of things that could be impacting wild Pacific salmon populations. Sam James is working on a project to figure out where the bottlenecks might be.
My name is Sam James, and I'm one of the program managers for the Bottlenecks to Survival program, which is a joint initiative between the Pacific Salmon Foundation and the BC Conservation Foundation.
And could you tell me more about the work you do around salmon?
Yes, of course. So the Bottlenecks to Survival program, in a way, the name says it all. There's a number of different things impacting salmon survival, but we want to try and see if we can find specific bottlenecks or pinch points or the areas where they're really facing disproportionate challenges. Across different populations and across different years. Our focus is really along the east coast of Vancouver Island. So we're looking at systems from Gold Stream down here in Victoria, which is where I'm based out of, all the way up to Campbell River. And the way that we're investigating this is using pit tag technology. So these are little tags that are about the size of a grain of rice. And they're not battery powered. They're not, you could think about it like the chip in your credit card or the chip that you would have in, say, your dog or your cat's ear. When it is scanned or when it passes over an antenna, it is activated and sends that unique code that is associated with that tag inside the fish. And then we get its whole history from that tag, where it was tagged, how old it is, where we tagged it, all of these different things. So it's a really interesting technology. One of the things I think is a tagged fish can tell 1,000 stories. And so once you put a tag in it, you can tell all these different things. And we're using that tagging fish in the hatcheries, on certain river systems, also tagging fish in rivers and then following them out to sea and doing beach seining, tagging fish in the estuary, and then going all the way out into the ocean and following them through that first marine fall and winter phase, which is believed to be a really critical life stage for salmon, that early marine phase. And so by comparing the survival of these different groups, we can start to understand where in that kind of early life history or life stages, they might be facing some of these critical survival bottlenecks.
Have you come across what those bottlenecks might be?
So it's still early stages. That's one of the joys and frustrations of working with salmon is they have these really complex life histories, and some return the year after they enter the ocean, some return 5 years later. So we're still waiting on the returns. And actually right now is a really exciting time because it's return season. So you'll see salmon returning to the Nanaimo River. You'll see fish going up into the Millstone. You see fish returning all over Vancouver Island. And so highly recommend getting out there and looking for salmon on your local rivers and streams. It's a lot of fun. But we kind of get really excited at this time of year because we see how many of our pit tags are coming back to each of our systems.
I have it in my head. I've heard that salmon populations in general are in decline. Is that true? Is that a thing that we can say with some degree of certainty?
It's dangerous to say something like that for all salmon populations. I would say it's a mixed bag. The Pacific Salmon Foundation actually just released a report called the State of Salmon Report and website. So I highly recommend checking that out. It's an amazing visual tool that very quickly shows you which species are doing well and which are doing worse than others by region. So that's stateofsalmon.psf.ca. And you can take a look at how salmon are doing on Vancouver Island. I'd say, yes, if you wanted to look at it province-wide, there's a lot of populations that are not doing well. And on Vancouver Island in particular, chum and steelhead have been hit quite hard. Or have been experiencing larger declines than the other species. I guess the important thing to note is it's so variable and it seems to be becoming increasingly variable. So it's hard to make blanket statements or talk about trends really, but they show that Chinook and pink in general are doing better on the Vancouver Island and mainland systems than those other species. So coho and pink and sockeye are not doing as well. However, recent, like last year and this year, kind of early escapement looks are showing that pink are showing up in huge numbers. Chum are like the big surprise kind of happy news story of this year. They were forecasting a terrible year for chum. And again, chum have been seeing larger declines than other species in this area. And they, did their test fisheries and found that there actually were large numbers of chum out there. So they ended up opening commercial and recreational fisheries to chum when they really didn't expect they would be able to do that. So there are some good news stories, especially locally, but it's complex. So again, I'd encourage you and your listeners to check out the website, and you can kind of dive into those data and those visuals in more detail.
I can't do a show in 2024 on salmon in Nanaimo without asking about 6-ppd, which for people who are just hearing those letters and numbers now, is a chemical found in tires. What can you tell me about that?
Yes, well, I myself don't have a lot of experience on this topic, but I do know that the folks over at the BC Conservation Foundation have been doing a lot of work on this, and particularly in partnership with VIU and their Applied Environmental Research Lab. They've also been partnering with around 30 plus, 35, I believe, First Nations and different volunteer groups across the east coast of Vancouver Island. So yeah, I'm sure many people have been talking and thinking about this topic, but for those of you that aren't familiar with this string of numbers and letters, it's been kind of a buzzword for the last few years, but 6-ppd quinone is a preservative in tires that prevents the rubber in your tires from cracking and degrading, which is what we all want. We want our tires to work. But when it's exposed to ozone, you get this compound 6-ppdq, which is actually really toxic to salmon and is the driver or the cause of some of this urban runoff mortality syndrome that we've seen in some species, where river systems that have high inputs of, urban storm runoff and things like that are suddenly experiencing mass die-offs after rain events, because the rain comes down, you get this huge kind of cleansing, if you will, of the streets, and all of this kind of tire toxicant runoff then ends up in these salmon-bearing streams. And coho seem to be the most sensitive to it. Yeah, we know that it's very toxic to salmon. One of the analogies that the folks working on it provided was that if you think about the concentrations that are toxic to salmon, it's like having half a teaspoon of that toxicant in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And that is the concentration at which it is lethal to salmon. And it's showing up in far higher quantities than that and concentrations than that in some systems. So BCCF and their team and their collaborators are running around all across the island, collecting samples around rain events to get some better understanding. And they also have a really great website if you want to know more about what they've been seeing and some of their up-to-date sampling data. It's called tireweartoxins.com. So that's tire and then WEAR toxins.com.
Are there any other maybe pressing issues related to salmon and society right now?
Just a few. Unfortunately, salmon are one of those animals. I mean, they're definitely in the limelight a lot, but they face a lot of pressures across their life cycle. And PSF focuses on the ones really that we can do something about. That's where we try to focus our attention and energy. So another kind of buzzword or buzz topic is around open net pen farms. Also the impacts of log booms around river mouths and how that impacts predation dynamics on salmon. Obviously, climate impacts are a huge one. The influence of hatcheries and competition for resources in the ocean. It's just like there's a long laundry list of pressures, which then ultimately have impacts on not just salmon, but salmon communities, which include the ecosystems and the people that rely on these healthy salmon runs. So yeah, the impacts are huge. And if listeners want to know more about kind of where things are at with the open net pen piece, Pacific Salmon Foundation has been looking at this for some time.
Could you maybe just explain what those are, open net fish farms?
Right. So open net farms are used to raise Atlantic salmon. At least here in British Columbia, that's the main sort of aquaculture that we see. And in fact, aquaculture, or the production of Atlantic salmon for food, has overtaken our harvest of wild fish, if you look at the numbers. So that's became the main production of fish is aquaculture. And it's these high densities of Atlantic salmon reared and held in a pen in the marine environment, usually near shore. And traditionally, these pens have been positioned along the migratory corridors of wild Pacific salmon stocks. So again, during that critical early marine period where survival and the threats to survival are really having meaningful impacts on their survival, they're then exposed to pathogens that may be coming from fish farms. So again, this is not necessarily my area of expertise, but there's more information on our research on salmon health on the PSF website. But we've come a long way in terms of removing open net pen farms from BC, which is a really, really important step for salmon recovery and resilience. Because what the recent science has shown is that pathogens and parasites do transfer between fish farms and wild salmon. The three big ones that some listeners may be familiar with, or maybe these are kind of new terms, but sea lice, of course, is the big one, as well as piscine reovirus, PRV, and Tenacibaculum bacteria. Those are kind of the three leading ones that people talk about right now that are found in both wild and farmed salmon as well. And so these have been on our radar for a while. These aren't kind of new sensational things, but we are continuing to do the work to understand the impacts that these are having on wild salmon. But the net pens and some of the good news stories around this is that most of the salmon farms along the Fraser River salmon migratory pathway, kind of through Strait of Georgia and up through the Discovery Islands, have been removed at this point. So all through along Seychelles, the Discovery Islands, and up through the Broughtons, those farms are gone. And so that's going to have a massive benefit for those wild out migrants.
And the crux of that is maybe an issue generating controversy in the headlines is these ecological effects have been identified, but then, the industry has a certain size and there are a number of people working in these local communities. And if they were to sort of shutter overnight, they would be impacted. That's sort of a real Cliff's Notes understanding on why it might be something controversial.
Yes, it's definitely a political hot topic right now, and I think has been for some time. It definitely impacts livelihoods, but it impacts the salmon as well, and those livelihoods associated with those. So there's pressure on both sides. There's different perspectives among different stakeholder groups, and it's really hard to get everyone kind of on the same page. But if you're just looking at it from a salmon's perspective, fish farms are not great. So if we're all in it for the salmon, I think we can find some common ground there to say that there's work to be done on removing fish farms and the negative impacts that they're having.
So it is salmon spawning season. How can people engage with that beyond listening to us talk about it today?
Yeah, get outside, figure out where your local salmon bearing streams are. The Nanaimo River, I know for sure there's salmon coming back. We've got our pit tag infrastructure there, and we can see our tagged salmon from years ago coming back, which we're really excited about. But I know all across the island, there's tons of places. Pacific Salmon Foundation has a salmon spotting program. So you can look that up through our website as well. And there's lots of tips and suggestions on where you can find salmon, at what times of year, what species. They've got little checklists on, equipment you should think about taking with you when you go out to look for salmon. but it's a really useful tool. You can actually, it's just psf.ca/salmon spotting. And there's a map. There's even a contest you can enter if you send some pictures that you could be entered to win some really fabulous prizes through that program. So definitely check that out. It's amazing getting kids out, particularly to look at salmon. It's just so inspiring to see these fish that have traveled so far come back to the rivers to spawn years later. And definitely inspiring. Highly encourage you guys to get out at this time of year and try and find some salmon in your local rivers and streams.
Well, Sam James, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about salmon today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Sam James is one of the program managers with the Bottlenecks to Survival program, a joint initiative of the Pacific Salmon Foundation and the BC Conservation Foundation. If you want to learn more about issues impacting salmon, you can head to the first of its kind Salmon Recovery and Resilience Conference in Vancouver, hosted by the Pacific Salmon Foundation from December 2nd to the 4th. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.